Welcome back to Studio 5. We talk a lot about developing good self-esteem, that inner confidence rooted in who you really are. But our next guest says self-compassion matters more. Studio 5 contributor Julie Hanks is the owner of Wasatch Family Therapy. She's brought our attention to this distinction. And when I think of compassion, the idea of just compassion, I would say women are pretty darn good at compassion. We're naturally compassionate people. But you say there's an aspect of this we could really afford to work on. Yes, we're compassionate toward others. And we tend to be critical toward ourselves. And that is the key with self-compassion and why it's so powerful. Because it teaches us to afford ourselves that same kindness and love that we give to other people so freely. You're putting self-compassion next to self-esteem. So let's start with self-esteem. How would you define that? So self-esteem is based on how we evaluate ourselves. And it's really based on how unique or special we are. And it's contingent on recent success. So how successful I've been recently, I base my self-esteem on that. That's true a lot of the time. Right, right? It's like, oh, I feel horrible because I failed that test. So your self-esteem goes down. Right, right. And then self-esteem really encourages us to hide our shortcomings, because if it's based on our performance or our recent success, we want to hide from that pain. And then it requires focusing on ourselves, like, okay, how do I measure up? Okay, so it's a way of evaluating our worth. Okay, so in contrast, then self-compassion is really how we treat ourselves, not how we evaluate ourselves. So whether we're recently successful or not, whether we were fired from a job or got a promotion, self-compassion is how we treat ourselves. It's something that all humans deserve because we're human, not because we're special, because we're human. It doesn't require any kind of external success. Personal shortcomings don't have to be hidden, and this is so key, Brooke. It's always available. How we treat ourselves is always in our control. And it's just, I love this concept. It's so, so powerful. A lot of women might confuse the idea of self-compassion with selfishness, right? They think when something's going wrong, it's not just affecting me, it's affecting my family and my husband and those around me, so shouldn't I be focused on them? What's the benefit of treating the self-compassion too? Well, when we are self-compassionate, it actually allows us to be more aware of other people's suffering. So if we're self-critical, our focus is narrow on how we can protect our ego and how we can hide our shortcomings. When we're self-compassionate, we're more open, because nothing's wrong. I'm in pain. I can comfort that, and now I can look outward as well. It probably puts you more in tune as well with what others are feeling, which you are able to soothe and nurture your own needs. It probably makes you more compassionate, but more in tune with what other people are feeling, and then later how you can help them. Is that fair? Yeah, yeah. And I talk about self-compassion in my book, The Burnout Cure, quite a bit. And the whole concept there is just when you take care of yourself, there's more of you to give to others. And this applies to self-compassion. When you are compassionate to yourself, there's more of you. And some people are afraid, well, if I'm self-compassionate, then I'm going to be lazy. Then I'm going to be self-indulgent or wallowing in self-pity. And the research shows the opposite is actually true. Interesting. Yeah. So if someone's listening to this description, they saw the two definitions and thought, gosh, I could really afford to improve in the self-compassion compartment. Yeah. What are some things we can do to develop that self-compassion that you talk about? Well, the first thing, and we mentioned this before, is to tune in and recognize our own suffering. And this is also called mindfulness, where we recognize it for what it is. We don't make more out of it or less out of it. So when we're in pain, when something goes wrong, you want to not look at it, right? You avoid. Right? Yeah. Oh, I got a bad work evaluation, or I just yelled at my kids. You want to ignore it. But tuning into your own suffering is actually looking at it for what it is and going, oh, yeah, no wonder you're yelled at the kids. You are really not physically feeling well today. Oh, you poor thing, kind of giving that to yourself, and then you're going to be more compassionate to your kids. But it does require you to dig below the action, right? Because you yell at your kids, you immediately feel guilty about that and want to forgive and get rid of that failure, if you want to call it that. But it requires kind of digging below the surface to get to the root of it a little bit. You're kind of doing a little therapy work on yourself. Right. It's recognizing your own pain. Recognizing your own pain. And we tend to not want to do that. Yeah. But it actually makes it easier to apologize to your kids or whoever, if you've done something that needs to be cleaned up. It's easier to do that when you feel okay about you and you're being kind to yourself. And you say just recognizing it isn't the only step. That kindness that you just talked about is kind of the next advancement towards self-compassion. Self-kindness. And it's more than just saying kind things to yourself.
it's actually how you treat yourself. So if a friend comes to you and says, you know, oh, my mom was just diagnosed with cancer, you wouldn't just say, oh, it's going to be okay, and tell, you know, you're strong. You wouldn't just, you would say, oh my gosh, you'd give her a hug, she'd cry. You'd do physical touch. We can do that to ourselves. So we can go, oh, that actually activates our positive hormones, oxytocin. I mean, culturally, right?
Just touching your arm.
Just touching, yeah, or tickling, or going, it's okay. And I do this, I will put my hand on my heart and just feel my heart and go, you know, it's okay. This is a really hard time for you, because I tend to carry stress in my shoulders and my chest. And so that physical soothing.
Interesting.
I know, but so this is, self-compassion has really been researched by Dr. Kristen Neff. And I had the chance to interview her on a radio show, and it was so powerful. And she said that, she's like, yeah, just don't go around hugging yourself in public. It may not be like,
yeah,
you're walking around
stroking, stroke.
But it's culturally not acceptable, right? But we can learn how to do that.
Well, I think this was a really tender story. A friend of mine shared recently, but she said, I would give anything in this moment. She was suffering and she was struggling. And she said, I'd give anything for my mom's hug, and her mom wasn't there. She'd passed on. It's kind of a self-soothing opportunity too. You talk about that self-hug, which some people may or may not feel comfortable doing, but just that opportunity to turn inward and soothe yourself a little bit. There might not be other people to do that.
Right, and there are times when no one is available or willing to do that, and that's the powerful part, is that we can always be there for ourselves, but we're not trained to do that. We're not trained to give that to ourselves. We think that's indulgent or selfish. It's actually not. It allows us to give more to other people.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier too, that if you focus on it, it will open you up to other people, and that kind of leads to your third point, that when you're able to tap into this self-compassion, it actually opens up your mind and your awareness to this shared suffering that we're all kind of connected by.
So when something goes wrong, say we're feeling not good enough, or maybe like I made a lot of progress in fitness over the last year, and then in 2 months it like basically went away. So it's like, you know, and I was kind of beating myself up about that. And I thought, you know what? That's okay. Everybody has times of success and failure. I don't have to feel ashamed of that. I can actually go, that's okay, Julie. Your son got married. It was crazy holidays. You're in school. Like, that's okay if you fall off the horse, get back on, let's get on the treadmill, you know, instead of just going, oh, I can't believe I wasted all that time, that self-criticism that is so just available to us. I had to really practice this.
Well, you're helping us do it. Thanks for bringing our attention to the conversation. I think it will have a lot of people thinking.
I hope so.
We appreciate it, Julie. Thank you. We'll remind you, Julie is the author of The Burnout Cure, an emotional survival guide for overwhelmed women. If you would like more information about that, or for additional resources on the topic of self-compassion, including those bonus interviews Julie mentioned, visit her website, juliehanks.com.